those people that are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that actually do.
Hi, thanks for coming. So my name's Anna and I currently work in growth at Spaceship. So for those of you who don't know what Spaceship is, we're a superannuation fund whose mission is to help our generation build wealth over our careers. So in the first 4 months at Spaceship, I built a wait list of over 40,000 people, and which accumulated $100 million in funds under management. With the $100 million in funds under management, we were able to raise off some of the world's most prestigious investors, including Sequoia, NEA, Horizons, and Peter Thiel's Valar Ventures. For the past 4 months, I've also been teaching growth marketing at Academy XI. So I'm actually just going to be running through 3 main topics today during my talk. So the first, I'm going to run through what the difference is between traditional marketing and growth marketing. Then I'm going to be doing a deeper dive into the first principles of growth and how to think like a growth marketer. And then I'll be going through my own tactics and what has worked for me to build traction for Spaceship, specifically our viral waitlist. And then after that, I'll have a Q&A session and then I'll be at your mercy. Cool. So what's the difference between traditional marketing and growth marketing? I actually get asked this question quite a lot, and I think this is a question that's weirdly controversial with a lot of people, just because they like to debate over the semantics. My answer to this is I don't really care what you call it. You can call it technical marketing, growth hacking, quantitative marketing, full stack marketing. It doesn't really matter. I think the shift from traditional marketing to growth marketing is in much more than just the terminology, and it's in much more than just the tactics that you're implementing on a day-to-day basis. I would say that the shift is actually more in terms of the change in your mentality towards marketing, and also the approaches you use when you're looking at the processes you're using on a day-to-day basis, and also how your team structure is going to look when you're trying to grow your business or when you're trying to grow your product. So let's take a look at the traditional marketing funnel. So this is basically what I learned in university when I did my marketing major. So you'll notice that most of the focus has always been on the first 2 layers of this funnel, which is in awareness and it's in acquisition. And the thing with this is that a lot of the growth marketers would have very specific goals that are targeted towards awareness and acquisitions. So what they're focusing on is technically stuff like, you know, your leads, your sign-ups, your downloads and your new users. And when they're looking at the data later, pretty much what they're going to see on paper is basically a linear increasing graph, just because you can't really go negative downloads or negative new users. And then because they have those specific goals, their team structure is optimized to, you know, increase those particular metrics and focus on those 2 layers of the funnel. So when you're looking at traditional marketing teams, you're going to see a lot of people with marketing backgrounds in stuff like PR, in stuff like content, paid advertising and SEO. And I think that the main issue with this is that there are so many other parts that aren't being addressed. So in the marketing teams, you won't see engineers, you won't be seeing data scientists or designers or product managers. And often those particular roles are kept in separate silos. And those latter parts of the funnel are often addressed by those particular silos. So you might actually see, you know, your activation and retention metrics being owned by your product team. And you might see your revenue metric being owned by your sales team. And I know that, you know, every organization is pretty much structured differently, but the main point I'm trying to make is that, you know, this funnel in most traditional marketing, you know, organizations are kept in different silos and kept in different teams. And the funnel is not viewed almost like, and the organization is not viewed almost like a living organism. And when I compare this to the growth funnel, you'll notice that growth marketers view this funnel in a much more holistic way. So the growth marketers actually view the funnel all the way down to revenue and referral, and they take ownership of the entire thing. So when you're looking at KPIs that growth marketers align themselves to, you'll see stuff like daily users or monthly recurring revenue. And when you're graphing this and looking at this over time, you'll see it actually goes up and down. So for example, your daily active users would go up on some days, maybe weekdays, and down on other days, like maybe weekends. And by having, metrics that are more aligned to, data that would give you a better picture of how your organization's performing, you're able to make better decisions in the future. So maybe knowing that, I get more users on weekdays, I might be focusing more of my marketing dollars on weekdays as opposed to weekends. And because those are the particular goals that, growth marketers are after, you'll notice that the team structure for, people who are focused on growth marketing is vastly different to that of traditional marketing. So you'll notice that a lot of growth marketing teams would have their engineers, the data scientists, designers, and product managers inbuilt within their team. And I think this is extremely important because often in larger organizations, you'll notice that engineering is completely separate and technology tasks to support growth are often deprioritized. So traditional marketers often have to fight tooth and nail to get the attention of their engineers, whether it's to fix a bug on the landing page or anything like that. It's often what I see as, a recipe for disaster for any organization when they're not focusing on growth. So for me, I actually think growth is somewhere in the intersection of product, marketing, and data analytics. So something I always say is you can't really sprinkle growth on top of product as an afterthought. Growth is something that should be used, so your product should be used as a vehicle for growth, and that should be driven by the data you're seeing from your growth metrics. So this brings me to the second part of my talk, which is more focused on how to think like a growth marketer and how you should sort of look at growth on a day-to-day basis. So I think to be successful in growth, you really need to know how to think. I think one major issue in our particular industry is that we're sort of addicted to these hacks. We're addicted to tips, tricks, and quick solutions as to like what can solve all our growth solutions at once. And I think that that's a major mistake we're making. Even looking at today's growthhackers.com feed, you can see that a lot of these are just band-aid solutions. Things like how Lonely Planet used email to launch its new homepage, conversation marketing, minimal viable optimization. If you had one day, how would you approach this? A lot of these are like very temporary things that don't actually dig into the core solution of your problem. And I think the main issue is that a lot of traditional marketers tend to get their learnings from these sort of hectic sort of content. When I think that it's really important, and while this sort of content is very addictive, I think it's really important to acknowledge that growth is so much more than just a book of ideas. Growth goes way beyond that. It's actually more about your processes. It's not really something you can copy and paste from product to product. Growth is actually a framework that you can use to apply to new problems in a repeatable and in a scalable way. Which is why I'm going to start with first principle thinking before I jump into my growth framework. So I think it's really important to think in terms of first principles, and what this really means is it's a physics-oriented way of viewing the world, and it's a way that Elon Musk has heavily endorsed in the past about how you should think about problems. So to think in terms of first principles, you should start your thinking or reasoning with the most essential facts. And then once you've got the most essential facts, then you can start focusing on the tactics. That's where you should be putting most of your mental capacity. So if you think of growth, I guess, almost like a block of land, the more land you have, the greater capacity you have to build on top of that land in a more complicated and complex way. So I think with first principles thinking, a lot of the problems you see in growth, a lot of problems you see in the real world, they often don't have a solution. And when they do have a solution, I don't think you really want to plug in the answers of someone who's done it before you. I think that the greatest upside and the greatest opportunity you'll ever have in growth will be problems that don't have an existing solution or problems that never existed before you got to it. So I think it's extremely important to understand the fundamentals and the first principles of growth. So what are the fundamentals? So this is something that I got from Brian Balfour, who runs the Reforge program, one of the most prestigious growth marketing programs in the world. So these are the 4 principles that he thinks that everyone should be focusing on, and these are ones that I also live by. So these fundamentals are both quantitative and qualitative, and they sort of work in a matrix sort of way. So when you're talking about quantitative metrics and fundamentals, you'll be looking at data analysis first. So this is basically how you're going to use data to identify, to understand, and to sort of use, sort of acknowledge the problem and the solutions that you have at hand. And then once you've gotten that, then you can go one step further and build a quantitative model. So your quantitative model is basically how you're going to use your data to make future predictions and to drive your next decision. So for example, if I was to run an experiment as to which value proposition is going to work better, I would be looking at the data and saying, okay, this one works better, so in the future I'm going to be using this one in my ad campaigns. And then it comes down to more of the qualitative side, which includes user psychology. So numbers that you get from data analysis and quantitative models are great, but they're sort of useless when they're not put in context, and they're useless when you're not using it to understand your customers, to understand your problem, to understand your solution, and to understand how your customers are going to respond to your particular solution. And then you could be great at all 3 of those things and still suck at storytelling. So storytelling is pretty much what ties everything together. It's how you're going to make what you've learnt through data analysis, quantitative models, and user psychology relevant to your end user. And I think that that's pretty much the factor that differentiates most good companies from great companies. So I really don't think you should underestimate how much time you spend on those fundamentals. Like I mentioned earlier, the more time you spend on fundamentals, the more complex tasks and problems you can solve. But basically, once you've got a hold of these fundamentals, then building on top of that with tactics is a lot easier. Cool. So this is what is generally known as the growth framework, and this is something that I use on a day-to-day basis. It's basically the idea of having your first principles and then using your first principles to come up with a hypothesis. Then once you've got your hypothesis, you would be building your MVP, which stands for minimum viable product. And that's basically, ideally without coding anything, but it's just basically the quickest way you can test your product, test your idea. Once you've tested it, then you take a look at the data, you learn from your data, and then use what you've learned to feed into your next hypothesis. And then at this stage, you're usually thinking, okay, that's a framework that I can work with to accelerate growth, but how do I prioritize my ideas? I've got so many I want to try. So I actually use this quite often. So this is, for me, this is just on a really jank Excel spreadsheet, but it's called like pie scoring, or some people call it ICE scoring. So it's basically ranking your hypothesis and your ideas based on potential. So that's the probability of actually achieving what you want to achieve. The impact, so how far does it impact your bottom line? And also your ease, so how easy is it to actually run that particular test? And then once you score them out of 10 for each category, then you get the average and you rank it by the average. I think that something else that you should take into consideration is exactly where your business is at that point in time. So if you're just starting up your business, you probably won't want to be looking at tests or hypotheses that impact stuff like retention, which is a lot further down the line. You might want to actually prioritize acquisition or awareness at that time as well. And then once I've prioritized that, what I do is I use a Kanban board. So Kanban board's something that's often used by engineering teams. It's also known as, I think, agile processes or something like that. It's basically when you're using your team to not just work on your own and complete your own tasks, but it's more about, taking projects from backlog to done as quickly as possible. So for example, if I was done with one of my tasks, I wouldn't be picking off from the backlog, I'd be picking off from something else that someone is in the middle of. And that would move the entire project as quick as possible. And then once the project's done, then I pretty much track it again in an Excel spreadsheet. So I would write down what my test was, the start and end dates, what my prediction was for that test, so what my hypothesis was for that particular test. my result, whether it's statistically significant, and also notes that I might also have. And by tracking all of these experiments in the same place, then you don't waste much time later down the track when you're like, oh, what happened last time I ran this experiment? So if you want to learn more about how to sort of address growth problems, then I'd probably take a look at these two books. So the first one's Eric Ries's The Lean Startup. If you're too lazy to read, you can actually just go on Google and type it in, and I think someone's written a great summary of it as well. And also the Checklist Manifesto. That's a great one to talk about agile processes and how you can get your project from 0 to 1 as quickly as possible. I don't think there's any summaries of that, so you'd probably have to read the book. Cool. So about my experiences with Spaceship, I think that there's a lot I did maybe further down the track that people like to focus on, but I think I couldn't have done that without starting from the beginning, which is understanding my customers. So in my first week at Spaceship, I actually spent all my time calling up my top 200 referrers of Spaceship, so the top 200 early adopters, and I actually created a customer persona out of them. I think it's extremely important to understand your customers, and I think and back to first principles thinking, it's really stupid to make assumptions based on what other people have done before. I think that if you're making assumptions, then it's really hard to differentiate. So when you're saying, you know, Airbnb did this well or Uber did this well, then your idea is pretty much already limited to something that someone's already done before. And differentiation doesn't come from copying other people. So I think you need to start from the very beginning, which is who are your customers, who loves your product, and why. So I think creating simple customer personas will help you know which features to build and test, and how to retain more users rather than guessing and wasting your marketing money. So this is basically the template I used when I first started calling up my first 200 customers. And this is actually extremely useful when it comes to content writing or copywriting for your website, and even your ads. So I actually didn't spend as much time as most people probably do testing copy, just because I actually just grabbed it from the mouths of our customers. So this sort of stuff you can probably find on Google Analytics or any sort of analytics platform you have. If you're running ads, you can find this even in Facebook Analytics. Just the breakdown of, you know, your gender, the age range, and what sort of person they are, what sort of jobs they're working, and, you know, how willing they are to purchase your product. But I think this is where all the interesting stuff is. So you really want to ask them stuff to find out what their goals are. So for example, when I called, I asked, what do you care about most with your super, to find out what their goals are. They told me returns and transparency. So I was like, okay. Then I was like, what does transparency really mean to you? And they told me, you know, it means reporting. So a lot of the times you actually have to dig down deeper into more qualitative manners, which is why I would recommend phone calls much more over, you know, online surveys and stuff like that. And then I had that in the back of my mind. I was like, okay, so I've listed, you know, the top 2 most common responses. I moved on. Challenges. So what challenges, or what didn't you like about your previous super fund? They would tell me what the issues they have. Like, they never communicate with me. They never, you know, I don't know what I'm invested in, and, you know, I don't even know how super works. So I listed that down as well. And how we help. So why did you choose Spaceship? And then from that, I was able to find out our top 2 value propositions, which was 1, you invest in technology, and I get a better understanding of my portfolio, and 2, you're tech oriented, which means you're more likely to focus on transparency. So what you really want to do is you want to really align your value propositions to the goals of your customer. And with those particular questions, that's exactly what you'll see on the Spaceship website right now. So everything that's on the Spaceship website is separated in panels, the goals, the concerns, and also what they like about Spaceship is pretty much just segmented in sections on our website, because I've pretty much just reiterated what they told me onto the website. And then I think one of the most, also if you want to do social proof, real quotes would be great on your website as well. But one of the most interesting questions, I think, is how would you describe Spaceship to a friend or a colleague? And what the answer to this is exactly what goes on my hero image. So they said, it's a super fund that invests in the future. And that's pretty much what you would have seen back in the early days on our website. So again, I wouldn't try to scale this process if you're not at scale. If you don't have, you know, tens of thousands of customers, I wouldn't be sending out surveys. I'd just be calling them one by one. And I would only really be calling people who either love you or hate you, just to get a better idea of what you need to be working on, and also what's easy to focus on. So sometimes you might just want to pick the low-hanging fruit. And second one, talk to your customers in their language, not yours. So a lot of the time, your customers don't have the same experience as you do, don't understand your product the way you do. And I think it's a mistake to sort of just assume that they do. It's much easier to just explain the product the way they would explain it to friends and family. So after that, I pretty much built out my growth funnel. So with my customer in mind, I was able to sort of understand what my funnel looked like and sort of focus more on what the drop-off points would look like. So I could have run a campaign for each part of this funnel, but obviously at the start I was focusing more on brand awareness and acquisition. So this is not Spaceship's one, but I pretty much used Mixpanel integrated with Segment to sort of get an understanding of where our drop-off points were in the sign-up funnel. So to give you a better idea, our sign-up form actually had a 66% completion rate down to mobile verification, which is probably, I don't know, triple the industry average. And the way I did this was actually just by tracking action to action. So from clicking the website sign-up button to verifying the mobile to sharing with friends, I was able to see exactly how they interacted with the website and pick up their drop-off points. So for example, what I was able to see for us was that a lot of people dropped off at the TFN stage. I don't even know where my TFN is, so I'm not surprised most people don't. So what we did after that was we had a little information bubble that stated you can get your TFN by calling the ATO on this number, or you can find your TFN if you're looking at your most recent payslip. And by that, I was able to bump that particular conversion rate up another 20%. And when you're talking in superannuation, I think that does a massive impact on your bottom line. Then I sort of started taking a look at the acquisition channels that I wanted to use. I'll probably just skim over this part, but I think a great book is to read Traction. And within that book called Traction, there's the Bullseye framework, which runs through all the acquisition channels that you can use. Like I mentioned earlier, it's probably not the best idea to just copy and paste what Spaceship used to get traction to your own product, because it might not be a good fit. But this is a great way to sort of start brainstorming your different channels that you could use. So there are 19 channels of traction that the book Traction goes through, and is also included in the Bullseye framework. If you just Google it, you'll be able to find pretty much exactly this. The way it works is you come up with an idea for each of those channels, and then you nail it down to 6. And with those 6, you come up with 3 ideas for each, and then you sort of prioritize them again to 3. You don't really want to be, I actually wouldn't recommend 3, I would probably focus on 1 or 2. And the reason for that is you don't really want to diversify your resources too much, because then you'll sort of do everything in an okay manner and not actually understand like the complexity of your customer and how they're interacting or finding your product. So just for an example, our viral waitlist fits into the virality channel mentioned in the Bullseye framework. So there are many different ways to approach virality, and our waitlist was just one of them. The most common one that everyone's heard of is probably word of mouth, and that's the most organic way you could possibly grow your business, which is just by me telling people. Inherent virality is very interesting as well. So inherent virality is where someone's experience of the product improves when you invite your friends onto it. So stuff like social media platforms where my experience increases the more friends I have, or or on LinkedIn, the more colleagues I have on LinkedIn, the more likely I would benefit from that particular product. Collaboration is stuff like Trello, where it only really works when your entire team is on there. Communication platforms, stuff like Slack, where you also need more people on there for you to experience the benefit of the product. There are incentive-based ones, which you would be more familiar with, such as Airbnb, Uber, and which offer monetary incentives to get you on the platform. And also embedding. So I think embedding is one that is actually extremely underrated. So if you think about how YouTube grew extremely quickly, it's because they had a great embedding feature. They made embedding extremely easy for blogs, for websites, and everything like that. It became pretty much the main platform for video sharing through embedding. So autoplay videos on Facebook, LinkedIn and stuff like that is a great way for YouTube to have grown. And I think that's one that a lot of people could explore but often don't. But what you're ultimately trying to do is you're trying to achieve viral loops. And viral loops are great because that means your marketing dollars get multiplied the more your customers or your users or people who find out about you share you. So Spaceship's initial traction was through our viral waitlist. So I'm just going to run through it now. So like I mentioned earlier, this was what our homepage looks like when we first launched Spaceship. The copy we wrote on it was an exact replica of what people told me on the phone. So they just told me, oh, I like Spaceship because it invests in tech. So I just wrote invest in the future, invest your super in a diversified portfolio with technology at its core. So basically exactly what our customers were telling us. And I think this form had a 20% conversion rate or something similar to that. So it was pretty good. Then we reached, when you put in your email, you would reach this page. So this is probably something that would be more different to what you'd see in most websites where they usually just end at the email stage. So we actually wanted more information. We wanted to know your phone numbers and we wanted to validate that you are a unique user of Spaceship. So what we really wanted you to do at this stage was to verify your mobile. And like I mentioned earlier, we had a 66% completion rate of this form. So we stated that you are currently in group 36 of the waitlist. This number was actually pretty arbitrary. It didn't really mean anything. We did go in order of the groups, but I think there were like tens of thousands of people in this particular group. But we said if you complete your profile, you move up 10 groups. And I think going back to your fundamentals of growth, which I mentioned earlier, this is something where your user psychology really comes to play. This is when your data turns more into something that's applicable for understanding how your user would interact with your marketing and to interact with your product. So once they've completed the form, they moved up to group 26. And then we said, if you spread the word, you'll move up 5 groups for every person who joins using your unique link. So there was another incentive that we used to gamify the process. So we actually had around, I think 10% of people who completed the form refer someone else onwards. And of those 10%, they referred around 2 people on. So we had a lot of people coming through this referral program. And this page itself, a lot of thought actually went into how it was designed. So the reason why we had existing tweets on the page was actually because it was an indication of social proof. So a lot of people are less likely to do something when they think that they're the only person doing it or that they're taking a risk by doing it. So by having social proof, people felt more comfortable sharing with friends because they're like, okay, great, like someone else is already doing this, so it's completely fair if I do it as well. And also the copy in those particular tweets are ones that we wanted them to say. So they're stuff that we thought painted Spaceship in the light that we wanted Spaceship to be painted in. We also made sharing really easy by having embedded buttons, so share on Facebook, share on Twitter, or share via email. And once you actually clicked on that, we'd actually written the copy for you already. And again, the copy was just a reiteration of what I found out during my customer persona survey. And we also had the unique link at the bottom as well, just so that it could be easily referred to. And then I sent them on a drip campaign. I don't think I have the entire drip campaign in this presentation, but this was the first email. It said it's from Paul from Spaceship, but it was actually from me. It says, hi there, you've been added to group 26 of Spaceship's waitlist. If you're interested in getting early access, here's your link again. So this is just a way to sort of reiterate this, and also to sort of make sure that the link is still accessible even after they've left that particular page, and that it's sort of always at the back of their minds. But I think a mistake would be to say that the referral program worked well on its own. I think that with high-end products, especially financial products, it's actually really important to build trust, and a lot of it actually comes from trust. So I don't think anyone would have shared Spaceship with a friend if it hadn't been for our other marketing methods. So one of our best sort of brand awareness and acquisition campaigns was our My Cannon Brooks one. It made it into a lot of news outlets. So the reason we put My Cannon Brooks was because my customer persona told me that a lot of our customers were from the technology industry. And I was like, okay, great. So who's in the technology industry that people would trust and would recognize? My Cannon Brooks. So CEO of Atlassian, probably first in the list for BRW's top 30 rich list. So a highly recognizable figure for people in the tech community. We got him to do an authentic quote. And then I also put in a lot of the companies we were investing in because I thought that was sort of a differentiating factor for Spaceship, the fact that we know who we're investing in and the fact that they're technology companies and the companies that are more likely to drive progress in the future. But that campaign worked really well. And I'd say that got us a lot of PR as well that we didn't pay for. We also did a astronaut of the day sharing campaign. So I did this on Twitter. I basically just got testimonials from a lot of our customers and I posted it with their photo embedded on a planet. And then people would just share it amongst their own networks and that got a lot of sort of traffic back to Spaceship as well because they would be like, oh, what's this? Like each of these individual tactics I don't think would convert a customer, but I think it's the amalgamation of all of them and the way that it built trust that ultimately did. So another example of social proof. We also had merch. So we sent out a lot of free runs, so we just did a lot of random sends of merch, but we also sold merch. And I don't think many people have heard of a super fun selling merch before. But that was great because I remember just going up and down the lift in the Spaceship offices and a lot of people were wearing our t-shirts. I thought it was pretty cool. But that's great for brand awareness as well when people just wear your stuff. We also had great outreach campaigns. So we had, our first one was Jane Liu, so CEO of Showpo, $30 million business. She came to speak with us. And I think a lot of that also builds trust with the community and our efforts in technology as well. So the way we approached our outreach campaigns was we'd had a different tech influencer from a different bucket of technology. So sometimes it was design, sometimes it was retail, sometimes e-commerce, and also some developers and stuff like that as well. And we just sort of tackle each bucket within the tech community to sort of grow awareness for Spaceship. We also entered in some awards, just more for validation of our product. And we also wrote a lot of content to prove that we knew exactly what we were talking about. So again, I think it's the amalgamation of everything we were doing at that time, which ultimately converted our people who rolled over in the end, just because I think with high-end products, it's never really an awareness campaign, or it's never really, one acquisition campaign on its own that could convert someone. And often when they don't work, so when you've only got that email, when you've only got that phone number, then I think that you should follow it up with a drip email campaign. So I probably built, dozens of drip campaigns to follow up, just sort of nailing them with different value propositions. And when you think about it, what's the worst that can happen when it comes to emailing? Like they could unsubscribe and that's about it. But if they do roll over, then that's a lot of, that's great impact on your bottom line as well. Cool. So to summarize, I think that referral campaigns are great, especially if done organically without paying anything. But I think there's a couple of things you should be looking out for. First, do you really need a referral campaign? So for a lot of people with strong organic growth, you probably don't want to run an incentivized referral campaign, just because it'll do nothing but increase your cost per acquisition. So if they were coming organically anyway for free, why would you pay them to do the same thing? The second thing is you would probably want to use an incentive campaign that would improve the experience of your product for customers. So my heuristic for this would be to just focus on your activation metric once you found out what that is, and sort of just make that the converting point for when they receive the incentive. So for me, it would be, once you get a friend to roll over, then you would receive the incentive. But there are also things to watch out for. So a great example of referral programs that have ended would be PayPal's one. So they sunk $60 million into their referral program. So they paid $10 for everyone who was referred onto PayPal. The reason they did that was because they actually needed critical mass for their product to be a good product. But after a while, they realized they didn't really need it. So the benefit of their product actually outweighed how much they could pay their customers. So they actually ended the campaign there. And it was actually a miracle that their referral campaign didn't get flooded with opportunists who just put in fake emails. But basically, in Elon Musk's words, as the network got bigger and bigger, the value of the network itself exceeded any sort of carrot that we could offer. And then also in their case, the cost per acquisition would have exceeded their customer lifetime value if you're only measuring by emails. Cool. So, yeah, open to questions.
At its core,